the point was in the talk was sort of provocative in sort of reminding people that the pieces of art and their producers that we typically think of when we think of modernist art are all male. They're Picasso and Matisse and those guys. And so it's sort of unabashedly a male field. And in their own circles, in the time, in real time, they sort of purported it to be a male field as well, in that it was for progress and anti the past, and that was the position that men took to sort of move us into the future, right? And so by their own self-definition and by subsequent historiography, I think it had been rendered very quickly as a male endeavor. Well, the first thing to remember, I guess, is that women were active in this as a field at the time. They were agents, they were patrons, they were artists in their own right, and they were multimedia artists in ways that many of their men cohorts were not. They weren't exclusively canvas art, and a lot of that's by necessity. But also, I think, positioning themselves in this larger discursive field of, you know, the gender of modernity, that they were making moves to render themselves and their art as equal players in a field that had been stacked against them. And so I showed some pictures of Marie Laurencin's work, who was, she was in and amongst the Cubists. She was with Apollinaire and Picasso. And it's interesting because she was sort of disregarded by males and females alike, including people like Gertrude Stein, as being too girly, too feminine in her rendition of her work. But I think that she used that strategically to then, you know, parlay her work into different forums, like advertising. Advertising specifically for women consumers. So being too girly wasn't an issue. It was kind of on point. If we focus on the female form in the classic way as the nude understood as rendered as an object by male artists, then we can quickly go into this discussion of the male gaze and the objectification of the female form and all of that. It's problematized when women are agents in that. Women start to depict the female form in a variety of ways, including nudes. But the nudes are different, and the nudes are, you know, I remember going to a show of Degas and Degas' dancers and the nudes and things like that. And it was rare that you would see their faces. You'd usually see them in silhouette or their backs or something. And so, you know, it makes it easy to talk about the objectification of the form. There's no human behind that, really, because you don't see the face. And in the nudes that we looked at today, for example, almost all of them are looking directly into the viewer's eyes, right? So there's this kind of challenge to empathy, to empathize with this person across, you know, the canvas as a human being with human emotions and identity. So the ability to objectify really gets diminished. You have to engage with that person. And likewise, the viewer doesn't have such a single role, right? The viewer becomes engaged in this emotional process that is co-constitutive. So I think that that's a difference in the depiction of women. But also I think a lot of the work that we saw today dealt with women in the domestic sphere doing domestic work, but I think that that's a strategy. I think that the women of the time were equally aware of this sort of public-private pigeonholing, that women do the private domain, the domestic sphere, and men are in the public. And the showing of women doing domestic work is sort of a strategy that allows women the women creators, to sort of remain, to appear to be in the private sphere, while clearly engaging in the public sphere, because they're doing works of art that are going to be shown. So I think it's a strategy. the National Museum in Helsinki, and I came upon a painting of the church, the St. John's Church in Helsinki. And I knew that church because I was living nearby, and I also liked this picture very much. It was just striking. And it turns out that Greta Halfors-Sipilä was married to another artist, and until very recently that painting had been attributed to him because it was inconceivable that she could do something like that, right? And that struck me as kind of the sort of essential sort of part of the narrative, that women somehow naturally become written out because, of course, that must have been her husband. You know? And then I went back to look at the rest of the body of her work, and when you see her work and when you see his work, you know that that picture, it confounds any kind of reason to understand how people could have misattributed that, because it's clearly a part of her larger body of work. It's just the momentum of the narrative. It sort of drives us. So Carl Larssen is one of the most famous Swedish painters internationally, but really in Sweden. He's like a beloved painter of the 20th century. And his paintings are all, they aren't all, I mean, there's a lot of landscapes and things like that too, but some of his most famous paintings are of their home. He was married to Karin Larssen. She was a schoolmate, an art schoolmate of his. They both exhibited together. They got married and set up house. And she, by virtue of the fact that she was a mother of 8 children and his wife, began to redirect her artistic talent to something that was manageable from being fixed at home. So she did all the home decor, she did the textiles, she did the embroidery. And those all sort of bleed through in his depictions of family life. The thing that his pictures are most beloved for is actually the scenes of the home life, that cute kind of Scandinavian home life. So arguably she's the reason for the fame of his pictures, but also that sensibility of what it is to be a sort of cozy Swedish home now has been picked up by IKEA, and you can see the train of connections from her embroidery and her geometric forms, very modern, to the decorative pillows at IKEA, right? So there's and arguably more people. I mean, we did a show of hands in the room, right? How many people have heard of Carl Larssen? Maybe like 5. How many people have heard of IKEA? Everyone, of course, right? So the idea that this is vernacularized modernity, it's really made potently in that example of those two, right? Well, specifically with women, what these new technologies and the technologies of production, of distribution, of publication, of technologies like cinema and film and photography, they're all brand new terrains. They're new frontiers in which the specific roles, the gender roles, haven't been carved out and claimed as they had been in canvas art. Right? There was a definite sort of pecking order and hierarchy in canvas art that made it more difficult for women to enter in from the ground floor, because the ground floor had long since been established. Right? And in fields like photojournalism, in advertising, in mass publication, things like that, everybody was brand new to the field because the field itself was brand new. And it gave an opportunity for women to enter in without the doors being closed automatically. And that works hand in hand with the idea of this vernacularization of these forms, because we're entering into mass production, mass distribution for commercial gain, right? So there's an economic incentive, and the emergence of the middle class with a sensibility that is, like in the case of Vogue magazine, you know, Vogue magazine is offering up chic on the cheap, really, you know. And so you can replicate that as a middle-class citizen. You can aspire to upper class through these mechanisms that, you know, 50 years before had not been available.